Welcome, everyone, to another installment of AFF CNY's pre-conference interview series. I am Shemin Vizzi. With this next presenter, we will dive into the struggles with climate anxiety as it relates to caring for our younger generation. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more, so let's check out the interview. Welcome, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you just do us a favor and start off by introducing yourself and maybe explaining to everyone how you're connected to adoption and foster care.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Megan Warner. I'm 25 years old. I currently live in Eugene, Oregon, where I work at a nonprofit and I teach waste prevention and sustainability to K through 12 students in Lane County. And then I was adopted from China in 1997. And I've actually recently started birth searching in the past year, and being reunited with other adoptees just from learning a lot about like the one child policy, and a lot of like documentaries and books have come out about adoption in China. So yeah, that's my background.
Okay, so I started reading a little bit about you and your experience, and I have some things I'd love to ask you. So you do, it says mindfulness facilitator, and then I caught wilderness therapy. Can you explain a little bit about that? That seems very different.
Yeah, so wilderness therapy was very new for me. It's kind of like a field that's relatively new as well. Um, and I was really interested in it because I love spending time outside, and there are a lot of health benefits associated with it. And so connecting the ideas of being outside and healing with young people was really interesting for me. So I worked in Hawaii at a place called Pacific Quest, where I was a program guide, and I worked primarily with adolescents and then young adults who were struggling with mental health issues. And we did a lot of gardening. That was our main like therapeutic activity. But we talked a lot about the idea of like sustainable self and sustainable environment, and then sustainable community. And that's kind of actually where I started getting interested in adoption, from working with other adopted students. And like, as soon as you sort of identify yourself as an adopted person, like it really opens up a lot of trust and conversations. And so from kind of hearing the experiences of adopted, essentially like adults, and like hearing how their experiences were different but also very similar to mine, was really transformative for me. And so and then I kind of shifted into this like, how can we sort of cultivate self-care around trauma? And so a lot of it has been mindfulness. And because of my work with the environment, there's been this new field that's really exciting, like addressing the intersection between climate change and mental health, which is what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation, and a topic I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I think from the perspective of like childhood trauma, mindfulness is a great tool. And it's just like a lifelong practice. So yeah.
What I always like to ask everyone who presents, why did you, how did it, let me rephrase, how did you take your personal story and decide, I always call it crossover to the public, sharing your story? That's a very hard thing to do, to, all right, this is a very close to my heart story, but now I'm going to let everybody in, learn from my lived experience. What made you decide to do something like that?
Yeah, I think it was this just like eye-opening experience with like vulnerability and unpacking trauma. Like it's really hard work. Um, and it's totally a very life-changing experience to do it with other students, but then like it also kind of reflects back on yourself, and you think a lot about your life, and you think a lot about how your experiences have shaped you. And it's just this like, but it's also a very beautiful combination of like personal growth. So I think I don't really know, but it's interesting because I'm like 25 years old, but I think I've actually been inspired a lot more by like younger adoptees sharing their stories. And so one of the cool things I think about COVID was like a lot of online communities emerged from COVID surrounding like stop Asian hate movements during the pandemic, and like Chinese adoptees, and just like reuniting us, which was kind of interesting. And so from talking to other adoptees who are honestly like much younger than myself and like 19, 20, but who either like are very passionate about adoption, who have like already birth searched. I think that's kind of what encouraged me to like be more open about sharing my story. And it still definitely is like, I'm very, I think, conscious of like who I share my story with, but it is a really good way to process and to like relate to other adoptees.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. So if you could say to the community as my last question, why is it important for everyone to see your presentation? How would it benefit everybody to hear what you have to say?
That's a good question.
Good question.
I think I don't know.
I know it absolutely does benefit everybody, but I like to hear from the presenters of what they feel. Why is it so important to hear something of what you're going to be speaking about?
Yeah, so I think it's just really interesting the ways in which I've grown up and sort of made these personal professional connections to like the way that I was brought into the world versus like the challenges that are basically put in front of youth today, which because I study sustainability, like the climate crisis is a very big challenge right now. And so I think I think my story is interesting just because it kind of like goes back all the way to when I was born and when I was adopted and the sorts of things that were happening. Like, for example, I was adopted when the government was fearful of like starvation and overpopulation and restricted the amount of children you could have. And it was a very much like a forced policy. But now, like, flash forward 25 years and like people my age are having to like actively question like, is it ethical to have children in the climate crisis? Which is like so personal to me because it's like my parents didn't have that choice and I don't want to sacrifice like my want to have children, but it's also something I question a lot. So I think it's just like it's an interesting story. And um I just never really thought a lot about my roots. So exploring that has been really like wonderful. But yeah, and I think also just from even if you don't study sustainability, I think everybody kind of has an awareness of the climate crisis. And so I think when it comes to like self-care and also just like processing the emotions surrounding climate change, those are all like things I will dive into. So yeah.